To get you ready, we send it out to Stadium Steel and the NBA Countdown. So now live.
They said bump them toys. Technology.
On a warm August evening in Birmingham, Alabama, the life of a man who had spent years shaping young athletes and guiding teenagers toward brighter futures came to a violent end. Demetrius Darnell Meet Beverly, a high school football coach admired as much for his passion as for his generosity, lay lifeless inside a modest apartment bedroom. Only hours earlier, he had been on the field at Parker High School, doing what he loved most, motivating his players, preparing for another winning season, and promising them that hard work and unity could take them anywhere. By nightfall, the coach they adored was gone. News of his death spread quickly.
Parker High School assistant football coach Demetrius Beverly was shot and killed at the Lakeshore Ridge apartment complex.
He's a hard-working coach on the field. He does what he's supposed to on the football field all the time with game planning and working with the coaches and working with the kid. He did a great job here at Parker.
His colleagues remembering him as a solid coach on and off the field.
He was a attention to detail kind of guy.
Shocking an entire city. Parents, players, and colleagues struggled to comprehend how a man so devoted to his family and his community could meet such a sudden, brutal end. A mentor turned victim. The kind of man who was always described as the heartbeat of his team, the one who never seemed to run out of energy or compassion. How could this be real? And then came the questions that no one could ignore. Why was Coach Beverly inside that apartment on August 13th, 2025? Who else was there with him? And how did it lead to his final moments? Most importantly, what drove a 23-year-old man, barely older than some of Beverly's own players, to walk in and pull the trigger without hesitation? What happened that night was not the work of a stranger, nor the kind of crime that leaves detectives searching for motives hidden in the shadows. This was an eruption of human emotion, raw, messy, and irreversible. It unfolded in seconds, and it would ripple outward for years. A wife and 3 daughters lost the man they loved most. A school lost a mentor, and a city lost someone who had been trying to give back more than he ever took. But the full story isn't just about a coach who inspired his players, or a young man who saw his life spiral the moment jealousy took control. It's about choices, about the thin line between self-control and catastrophe, and about the way one night of betrayal and rage destroyed 2 families forever. Before we dive deeper, if you're watching this and haven't yet subscribed to Truly Criminal Network, I have to ask why. This channel exists to bring you the cases that matter, and if you choose not to support us, at least let us know in the comments what's holding you back. Before his name became tied to headlines about a deadly shooting, Demetrius Darnell Meet Beverly was a man defined by purpose, passion, and family. Born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, Beverly never forgot where he came from. He was an alumnus of A.H. Parker High School, the very place where he would later return to teach and coach. For him, football wasn't just a game, it was a bridge, a way to connect with young people and steer them away from destructive paths. At Parker High, his presence was electric. Students often said you could hear his voice booming across the field before you even saw him. He wasn't the kind of coach who relied solely on whistle drills and playbooks. He invested himself in the lives of his players. If a student was struggling in the classroom, he'd stay late to help with homework. If someone faced issues at home, Beverly would lend an ear, often reminding them that discipline and determination could carry them through any storm. Colleagues described him as the man who brought energy every day and treated the team like family. That same devotion carried into his home life. Beverly married Tara Hall, and together they built a life centered around love and responsibility. They were raising 3 young daughters, each of them the apple of their father's eye. Friends recall that no matter how demanding football season became, Beverly was present for the small things, cheering from the sidelines at school events, cooking family meals, and making sure his daughters knew they were cherished. His wife described him as a husband who never hesitated to place family first, even when balancing the pressures of work. The wider Birmingham community also knew him as a man who gave more than he took. At church services, in local mentoring programs, or simply in passing conversation, people noticed his generosity. He'd give you the shirt off his back, one friend remembered. It was not just a figure of speech. Beverly genuinely lived by that ethic. He became a mentor not only to students, but to younger coaches, many of whom leaned on his advice and example as they learned the ropes. And yet, behind the image of the dedicated coach and family man, Beverly carried private choices that added complexity to his story. In his personal life, he was maintaining a relationship outside of his marriage. A decision hidden from most who admired him. It wasn't something visible to his colleagues or community, but it placed him in a situation that would later prove life-altering. To those who knew him best, this aspect of his life didn't erase the good he had done. But it did reveal that, like anyone else, Beverly was not without flaws. As Parker High celebrated one of its most successful football seasons in history, a championship run that had students and alumni swelling with pride, Beverly was already helping plan for another. He spent countless evenings breaking down film, organizing practice schedules, and urging his players to chase not only athletic success, but academic and personal growth as well. Few could have imagined that while he was pouring his heart into shaping the next generation, his own time was running short. To his daughters, he was dad. To his wife, he was partner and provider. To his players, he was the role model they aspired to emulate. And to his colleagues, he was the coach who brought unmatched spirit to the field. That is how Demetrius Beverly should be remembered, as a man who lived to inspire. His private struggles complicate the narrative, but they also remind us that even figures who seem larger than life carry burdens and imperfections. What no one could predict was how quickly those imperfections would collide with fate. Wednesday, August 13, 2025, began like so many others for Demetrius Beverly. The summer heat hung over Birmingham, but at Parker High School, he was exactly where he thrived, on the field with his team. The Thundering Herd were in preseason mode, hungry for another championship after their historic win, and Beverly's energy was contagious. Players later recalled how their coach paced the sidelines that afternoon, breaking down plays and demanding the same level of detail he always preached. "Pay attention, because details win games," he had told them, a phrase that now echoes painfully in hindsight. Those who saw him that day noticed nothing unusual. There were no signs of tension, no hints that something was weighing on him. Friends remembered him smiling, trading jokes with colleagues, and talking about goals for the upcoming season. He wasn't a man acting paranoid or distracted. To the outside world, it was a completely normal day. After practice, Beverly slipped back into his other roles: husband, father, and community member. He juggled the familiar balance of checking in on family life while preparing for the next round of practices. To those around him, it was routine, and perhaps that was what made the hours ahead so difficult to comprehend. Nothing about that Wednesday foreshadowed tragedy. As evening settled, Beverly made a personal decision that would ultimately alter everything. Away from the field and the eyes of his family, he drove to the Lakeshore Ridge Apartments, where he had plans to see a young woman he was involved with. This visit was not public knowledge, and certainly not something he advertised. But for Beverly, the trip must have seemed ordinary in its own way, just another compartment of his life he thought he could manage. Sometime before 9 p.m., he arrived at the complex. The apartment was quiet, the setting unremarkable. 4 walls, dim lighting, and everyday living space. Nothing suggested danger was imminent. For Beverly, the expectation may have been simple: an evening visit, a private escape before returning home. What he didn't know was that another man, 23-year-old DeCorlean Robinson, was on his way back to the very same apartment. Robinson's ties to the young woman made his arrival more than coincidence. It set the stage for a collision that would erupt within minutes. At that moment, Beverly could not have predicted the course of events awaiting him. To those who loved him, he was wrapping up an ordinary Wednesday. To his players, he was a coach they'd see at practice the next day. To his family, he was expected home as usual. But in reality, Beverly's final hours were counting down, and the decision to be at that apartment placed him in a situation from which he would never return. At the Lakeshore Ridge Apartments, the quiet of the evening was shattered in an instant. Inside the unit, Demetrice Beverly and the young woman he had come to visit were in the bedroom when the door suddenly opened. Standing there was her boyfriend, 23-year-old DeCorlean Robinson, returning home earlier than expected. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Witness accounts confirm that Robinson, upon seeing Beverly in the bedroom, did not pause to ask questions or demand explanations. Instead, he raised the handgun he carried and opened fire. The confined space of that apartment amplified the sound, rapid, deafening blasts that cut through the stillness. Beverly collapsed where he stood, struck by the bullets that ended his life within moments. The young woman, the only other person in the room, froze in disbelief before rushing to Beverly's side. The man who only hours earlier had been coaching teenagers on the football field now lay motionless on the floor. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Her voice, captured in that desperate call, conveyed raw panic as she told the dispatcher her boyfriend had just shot someone. She named Robinson immediately, giving police not just the identity of the shooter, but also his connection to her. The first units from Birmingham police were dispatched within minutes. They arrived just after 9 p.m. to the 1100 block of Lakeshore Ridge. Entering the apartment, officers found the grim scene. Beverly lying unresponsive in the bedroom, multiple gunshot wounds confirming the horror described in the call. Paramedics attempted to revive him, but the injuries were catastrophic. At 9:26 p.m., Demetrice Beverly was pronounced dead at the scene. Outside, the situation was still fluid. Robinson had fled the bedroom immediately after firing the shots, running out into the complex's parking lot. But his attempt to escape was short-lived. Officers arriving at the scene spotted him almost immediately. He matched the description relayed by the dispatcher, and within minutes of the shooting, Robinson was in handcuffs. The firearm, still in his possession, was confiscated. Later tests would reveal it had been illegally modified with a device capable of making it fully automatic. For the young woman who witnessed the shooting, those minutes were a blur of trauma and disbelief. She stayed on scene, speaking with investigators through tears, her voice breaking as she described what had just happened in her own bedroom. For the officers and paramedics, it was clear this was no robbery or random act. It was a domestic confrontation that escalated into irreversible violence. By that same night, word of the tragedy began spreading far beyond the apartment walls. Beverly's wife, Tara, and his family were notified. Their world turned upside down in an instant. Parker High School, where Beverly had spent the afternoon encouraging his players, was thrown into mourning by morning. Students arrived at school the next day to whispers in the hallways, teachers with red-rimmed eyes, and grief counselors brought in to help them process the loss. On social media, tributes flooded in. Former players shared stories of how Beverly had kept them motivated when they considered quitting. Parents posted about the coach who went out of his way to check on their kids. Head coach Frank Warren called the loss devastating and admitted there were no words strong enough to describe how much Beverly meant to the team. The city itself felt the impact. In Birmingham, Beverly was more than a coach. He was a role model and father figure to countless young people. Residents who had never met him still joined in the collective mourning, posting condolences and offering prayers for his family. Within 24 hours, candlelight vigils were already being organized. Students gathered at the football field to release balloons in school colors, and the community braced itself to carry the weight of a tragedy no one expected. For those closest to him, the most painful part was the speed of it all. 1 minute, Beverly was alive, coaching, laughing, planning the next season. Minutes later, he was gone. No warning, no time for goodbye. The suddenness of his death left family, friends, and students struggling not just with grief, but with disbelief. What began as an ordinary Wednesday had turned into a defining moment for an entire community, a night when loyalty, jealousy, and rage collided, leaving behind silence, sorrow, and questions that will never fully be answered. The night of August 13th, law enforcement's response was unusually swift and decisive. In many homicide cases, investigators spend days or even weeks trying to identify a suspect, secure a weapon, and build a timeline. Here, everything fell into place within minutes. The woman inside the apartment gave officers an immediate eyewitness account. The shooter was her boyfriend, 23-year-old DeCorlean Robinson. She described what he had done and confirmed his connection to her, leaving little doubt about motive. This clarity from the very first 911 call gave police a rare advantage. They didn't need to search for a shadowy figure or untangle conflicting stories. They knew exactly who they were looking for. When officers canvassed the area, Robinson was still on the property. In fact, he was spotted in the parking lot of the complex only moments after the gunfire. He was taken into custody without incident, his adrenaline spent. The speed of his arrest meant he never had the opportunity to hide evidence, flee the city, or alter the narrative. For investigators, it was as close to an open and shut identification as possible. Equally significant was the recovery of the weapon. Officers confiscated the handgun Robinson carried, but it wasn't an ordinary firearm. Fitted to the gun was an illegal conversion device, a small piece of equipment that transforms a standard semi-automatic pistol into one capable of firing in rapid succession, essentially mimicking a fully automatic weapon. For prosecutors, this detail became more than a technicality. It elevated the seriousness of the charges and raised troubling questions about why a 23-year-old was armed with such a modification in the first place. Back inside the apartment, detectives began cataloging the scene. They documented Beverly's position in the bedroom, noting that there were no indications of a struggle or forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. Robbery was ruled out immediately. It was clear this was a confrontation fueled by personal rage, not criminal enterprise. Forensic teams collected shell casings, photographed blood patterns, and secured the 911 recording for later use in court. Each piece of evidence painted the same picture. Beverly was unarmed, caught off guard, and had no chance to defend himself. By the following day, August 14th, Birmingham police announced Robinson had been charged with murder. Alongside that, prosecutors filed a separate weapons charge tied to the conversion device. These decisions were made swiftly because the case did not hinge on mystery. It was about intent and responsibility. Was Robinson guilty of deliberate murder, or could his defense argue the killing happened in the heat of passion? From the outset, Robinson's attorney hinted at the strategy they would pursue. He acknowledged that Robinson had fired the fatal shots, but framed it as an impulsive act brought on by an emotional discovery. That legal angle meant investigators didn't have to prove who pulled the trigger. Robinson's side admitted as much. The focus shifted instead to proving why and whether the act met Alabama's standard for murder. For police, it was a rare situation where the most difficult parts of an investigation, identifying the suspect, locating the weapon, and establishing a timeline, had all been resolved within hours. The challenge ahead was not in evidence collection, but in how the justice system would interpret that evidence. In the aftermath of Demetrius Beverly's death, much of the focus naturally centered on the victim, his life, his influence, and the community's grief. But to fully understand this case, it's equally important to examine the man accused of pulling the trigger. DeCorlean Keyshawn Robinson. At just 23 years old, Robinson was a young man still carving out his place in the world. Unlike Beverly, he wasn't a public figure. He wasn't known citywide, and his name only entered headlines because of what happened on August 13th. Robinson lived in Birmingham, sharing an apartment with his girlfriend, the same apartment where the fatal encounter took place. Robinson and Beverly had no personal history together. They weren't rivals on the field or longtime acquaintances. Their connection existed solely because of the woman in the middle. Beverly's companion that evening was Robinson's girlfriend. That link alone was enough to place the two men on a collision course. Accounts suggest Robinson arrived home that night expecting the ordinary comfort of returning to a familiar space. Instead, he found a married high school coach in the bedroom with his partner. The discovery triggered a reaction that spiraled out of control in seconds. For Robinson, the sense of betrayal cut deeply. What he did next was catastrophic, but the emotional cocktail of jealousy, anger, and humiliation helps explain how the situation escalated so quickly. In the weeks following his arrest, Robinson's defense attorney painted a picture of a young man consumed by rage in a single moment. He described Robinson as having seen red, suggesting this wasn't a carefully plotted act, but an impulsive response to an unexpected confrontation. The phrase used repeatedly was heat of passion, a legal argument designed to reduce culpability by framing the shooting as a crime born of provocation rather than calculation. Robinson's decision to carry a gun, however, complicates that narrative. He didn't need to leave the apartment to find a weapon. He already had one on him when he walked through the door. The fact that the handgun was illegally modified raises questions about his relationship with firearms. Did he habitually carry for protection, or did it speak to a deeper comfort with the idea of using force when challenged? That detail may prove pivotal when jurors eventually consider his intent. Outside of this tragedy, little has been publicly reported about Robinson's background. Friends and family have not spoken extensively to the press, leaving gaps in his personal story. Unlike Beverly, whose life was well documented through decades of coaching and community service, Robinson's identity remains mostly defined by this single night. What we do know is that he was young, emotionally volatile in that critical moment, and now stands accused of a crime that could shape the rest of his life. Psychologically, his actions suggest a man unable to regulate extreme emotions. Countless people experience jealousy or anger in relationships, but most don't resort to violence. Robinson's choice to act with lethal force reveals a dangerous lack of control. Whether he will ultimately be seen as a cold-blooded killer or a man who snapped under provocation is precisely the debate awaiting the courtroom. For now, Robinson's legacy is tied to a single catastrophic decision, one that took the life of a respected coach, shattered two families, and left a community asking how a moment of rage could carry such permanent consequences. The hours immediately following Demetrius Beverly's death left Birmingham police with little mystery about what had happened. But what began as a straightforward arrest quickly moved into the complex arena of the courts, where facts, emotions, and legal arguments all collide. Within 24 hours of the shooting, Jefferson County prosecutors filed two major charges against DeCorley and Robinson: one count of murder and one count of unlawful possession of a firearm conversion device. The murder charge reflected the gravity of his actions inside the apartment. The weapons charge underscored a troubling fact. The gun in his possession was altered to fire at speeds comparable to military-style weapons. For the state, these dual charges were a way to present Robinson not just as an enraged boyfriend, but as someone who carried an extraordinarily dangerous weapon into a volatile situation. At the same time, prosecutors pushed for Robinson to remain in custody while awaiting trial. Under Alabama's expanded bail law, known as Aniah's Law, judges can deny bond in cases involving violent offenses. It seemed almost certain that Robinson would be held without release, especially given the seriousness of the charges. Prosecutors argued as much during an initial hearing, citing both the severity of the crime and the risk to public safety. Yet what happened in court surprised many observers. Robinson's defense attorney, Emory Anthony, argued that his client did not deserve to sit in jail indefinitely before trial. He insisted the killing was not premeditated murder, but a reaction in the heat of passion. It was in this context that something remarkable occurred. Members of Beverly's own family stepped forward and told the court they did not oppose Robinson being granted bond. For a grieving family to support the release of the man accused of killing their loved one was almost unheard of, and it profoundly influenced the judge's decision. Ultimately, Robinson was granted bond, set at $165,000 total, split between the murder and weapons charges. Conditions of release included surrendering firearms, remaining in Alabama, avoiding contact with Beverly's family, and committing no further offenses. On August 19th, after securing the required amounts, Robinson was released from custody while awaiting trial. This moment underscored a central theme of the case: complexity. Even as Birmingham reeled from the loss of a respected coach, Beverly's family displayed an extraordinary measure of compassion, choosing not to demand strict pretrial confinement. Their decision sparked conversation across the community. Some saw it as a sign of forgiveness or empathy. Others questioned whether it was too lenient for someone charged with taking a life. Either way, it was clear the family's voice carried significant weight in shaping the court's approach. From that point forward, the case became a clash of legal strategies. The prosecution, armed with eyewitness testimony, forensic evidence, and the recovered firearm, had little difficulty proving Robinson fired the fatal shots. Their task was to show that his actions amounted to intentional murder, not an excusable or understandable outburst. They highlighted the fact that Beverly was unarmed, caught off guard, and given no chance to defend himself. They also emphasized the illegal firearm modification, painting Robinson as someone who carried an unusually dangerous weapon into his home and chose to use it in a moment of anger. The defense strategy moved in the opposite direction. Rather than deny the shooting, Robinson's attorney leaned into the narrative of provocation. He argued that Robinson had come home to an unimaginable betrayal, his girlfriend in bed with another man, and reacted as many might in the heat of that discovery. By framing the act as an impulsive response to emotional shock, the defense aimed to reduce the charge from murder to manslaughter, which in Alabama carries a significantly lighter sentence. This clash of interpretations, intentional homicide versus crime of passion, would form the backbone of the courtroom battle. The legal system was no longer tasked with identifying the killer. That part was settled. Instead, the central question became how to classify the killing under the law. Was Robinson a murderer acting with deliberate disregard for life, or a young man who snapped under unbearable provocation? You've stayed with us through the twists of this case, so if you're still watching and haven't hit the like button or subscribed to Truly Criminal Network, what's stopping you? Think about it. We put hours into making sure these cases are told fully and respectfully. If you find value here, support us. And if you don't, at least be honest and tell us why in the comments. We read everything. With Robinson released on bond and awaiting trial, the stage is now set for a legal showdown that will determine how justice is defined in this case. Unlike many homicide trials where the identity of the suspect is contested, here the facts of who pulled the trigger are not in question. The focus is on intent, whether Robinson's actions meet the threshold for murder under Alabama law, or whether his defense can convince a jury that the crime fits the narrower definition of manslaughter. The prosecution is expected to lean heavily on several pieces of evidence. Chief among them will be the testimony of Robinson's girlfriend, who not only witnessed the shooting, but also placed the 911 call that identified him as the shooter. Jurors will likely hear that call in open court, a recording filled with panic and desperation that could drive home the immediacy of the act. Forensic reports will also be central, detailing Beverly's wounds, the trajectory of the bullets, and the lack of any defensive injuries, all reinforcing the claim that Beverly was caught entirely off guard. The modified firearm itself will almost certainly be introduced as a key exhibit. While the defense may argue that its configuration is irrelevant to Robinson's state of mind, prosecutors will present it as evidence of recklessness and potential premeditation, suggesting that a man who carries such a weapon is more likely to use it. Combined with the illegal modification charge, this detail provides jurors a tangible reminder of the destructive power Robinson wielded. On the other side, the defense will pursue the heat of passion strategy. Under Alabama law, manslaughter can be argued when a defendant acts in sudden rage provoked by circumstances that would cause an ordinary person to lose self-control. Robinson's team will try to convince jurors that finding his girlfriend with another man qualifies as such provocation. They may bring in psychological experts to describe how intense jealousy can override rational judgment, reframing the killing as an impulsive act rather than a calculated one. Still, the defense faces hurdles. For one, the law requires that provocation be both strong and immediate. Jurors will be asked to weigh whether jealousy, even in the face of betrayal, is sufficient to justify pulling a trigger multiple times. The prosecution will argue that countless people experience similar betrayals without resorting to violence, and that Robinson made a conscious choice that night. The trial is expected to last several weeks once it begins. jurors will sift through eyewitness testimony, forensic science, expert opinions, and emotional appeals from both sides. At the end, they will be tasked with delivering a verdict that could alter Robinson's future permanently. A conviction for murder could mean decades behind bars. A lesser conviction for manslaughter would carry a lighter sentence, but still a significant one. And there remains the possibility of a plea deal before the case ever reaches a jury, though prosecutors have not signaled any intention to offer one so far. No matter the outcome, the trial promises to be a defining moment not only for Robinson and Beverly's family, but also for the Birmingham community still grappling with how such a tragedy could unfold in their midst. For Beverly's wife, Tara, and their 3 daughters, the news of his death was more than devastating. It was life-shattering. In the span of a single night, they went from planning a future together to facing a lifetime of absence. Tara was left to explain to her children why their father would never again be in the stands at their events, never walk them down the aisle, never be there to offer advice or laughter at the end of a long day. Family friends recalled that the daughters, all still young, were bewildered in those first days, asking questions no parent should ever have to answer. The funeral service for Demetrice Beverly drew crowds that reflected his influence. Hundreds of people filled the church and spilled into overflow rooms, many wearing Parker High's maroon and white colors. Former players spoke about how Beverly had shaped them, not just as athletes, but as men. One described how Beverly had called him late at night during his senior year when he was considering dropping out, urging him to push forward. "I wouldn't have graduated without him," the young man said tearfully. Others remembered his booming laugh, his ability to connect with anyone, and his habit of turning the smallest victories into teaching moments. At Parker High, the atmosphere was unlike anything students had ever experienced. The football field, usually a place of energy and competition, became a gathering point for grief. A makeshift memorial grew along the sideline. Photos, flowers, jerseys, and handwritten notes left by students and staff. The Thundering Herd dedicated the season to their fallen coach, painting his nickname, Meat, across helmets and locker room walls. Every game became more than competition. It was a tribute. Players took the field not just to win, but to honor the man who had taught them discipline and unity. Beyond the school, the Birmingham community responded with an outpouring of support. Local leaders organized vigils, neighbors brought meals to Beverly's family, and churches hosted prayer services in his memory. The city's mayor released a statement acknowledging Beverly's contributions, calling him a role model whose influence cannot be measured in wins and losses, but in the lives he touched. But along with grief came difficult conversations. Beverly's death sparked discussions about the destructive power of jealousy and the prevalence of firearms in emotionally charged situations. Counselors visiting Parker High reminded students that anger, if left unchecked, can destroy not just one life, but entire families. Community forums highlighted the need for conflict resolution, education, mental health support, and better pathways for young men who, like Robinson, struggle with controlling volatile emotions. For Beverly's family, grace became a defining feature of their response. When Robinson was granted bond, the public was stunned to learn that Tara and other relatives had not opposed it. While they grieved deeply, they chose not to seek vengeance. Friends close to the family explained that Beverly himself had always believed in second chances and redemption, values his loved ones tried to carry forward. Their choice did not erase their sorrow, but it demonstrated a remarkable commitment to compassion, even in the face of profound loss. In Birmingham, people still talk about how the tragedy brought the city together, even if briefly. Strangers connected at vigils, alumni returned to campus to support current students, and rival schools offered condolences. The story of a coach taken too soon became not just a tale of loss, but also a reminder of how one individual's impact can echo long after he is gone. In the months following his death, it became clear that Demetrice Beverly's influence would not fade with a single season or a single graduating class. His legacy began to take shape almost immediately, as Parker High and the broader Birmingham community sought ways to keep his memory alive. One of the first gestures came from his football team. players insisted that every game they played be dedicated to Coach Beverly. His initials were stitched onto uniforms, and his favorite motivational sayings were painted across locker room walls. For the young men he had mentored, playing with his name close to their hearts gave them strength, transforming grief into determination. That season became about more than wins and losses. It became a mission to honor the man who had led them with such passion. Beyond the school, alumni and community leaders launched initiatives in his name. A scholarship fund was created to support student athletes pursuing higher education, ensuring that Beverly's commitment to both academics and athletics would carry on. Former players contributed, parents donated, and local businesses stepped up to fund a program that would help shape futures long after the headlines had faded. Each scholarship awarded in his name stood as a testament to the lessons he instilled: discipline, perseverance, and character. Memorial services also became annual events. On the anniversary of his death, gatherings at Parker's football field brought together students, alumni, and families from across the city. Candles were lit, balloons were released, and stories were shared about Beverly's impact on individual lives. These events weren't simply about mourning. They were about celebrating the life of a man who gave more to others than he ever asked in return. Even within the coaching community, Beverly's influence remained. Younger coaches who had once looked to him for guidance continued to pass down his teachings, ensuring that his approach to leadership and mentorship lived on. His methods, combining discipline with compassion, demanding excellence while offering support, became part of Parker High's cultural identity, carried forward by those he had trained. Perhaps most importantly, Beverly's daughters continued to grow up hearing how beloved their father was. Teachers, players, and community members made a point to share stories with them, reminding the girls that their father's life was defined not by the tragedy that ended it, but by the countless lives he touched along the way. In this way, Beverly's story did not end in August 2025. His voice still echoes in the halls of Parker High. His presence still felt in every student awarded a scholarship in his name, and his values still carried by the young men he once coached. His life, though cut short, left a legacy too strong to be forgotten. The story of Demetrius Meet Beverly is one that forces us to reflect on the fragile line between ordinary life and irreversible tragedy. A husband, father, and mentor spent his last hours doing what he loved most, coaching and encouraging others, before walking into a situation that ended his life within minutes. The young man, consumed by jealousy, made a choice in a moment of rage that will define him forever. 2 families were shattered, and a community was left searching for meaning in the senseless. This case reminds us that violence rarely happens in a vacuum. It is often the product of emotions left unchecked, anger, humiliation, and betrayal combining in ways that destroy futures. The lesson is not just about a crime of passion. It is about the importance of self-control, of walking away instead of escalating, of finding non-violent ways to process pain. The outcome here demonstrates how one decision, made in seconds, can reverberate for decades. For Beverly's family, their grace in the aftermath has been striking. Choosing not to seek vengeance, they reminded Birmingham that forgiveness, while difficult, can be more powerful than hate. Their response is perhaps the most enduring lesson of all: compassion in the face of grief. As viewers, we should ask ourselves what we take away from this story. Is it the reminder that role models like Beverly must be celebrated while they are alive? Is it the cautionary tale of what jealousy can destroy? Or is it the challenge to channel our strongest emotions into something constructive rather than destructive? Each answer carries weight, and each offers an opportunity for change. As we close, remember, one simple click on like, share, and subscribe helps Truly Criminal Network keep bringing you stories that matter. If you decide not to subscribe, at least let us know why in the comments. We want to understand.